All right, guys. This is our last ghost, last ghostly character who is struggling to decide whether he wants to stay in the high countries or return to the gray town. And the chapter begins with C.S. Lewis walking with George MacDonald, and he sees this really awe-inspiring procession going on. There's bright spirits, there's animals, there's children, and they're all like worshiping and celebrating and following this lady. And C.S. Lewis wants to know who it is, and he says, is that?" And we don't know who he's getting at exactly. I have a couple guesses on who we might think it is. Um, but George MacDonald answers and goes, "Oh, that's Sarah Smith, right? That's Sarah Smith." And on Earth, she was no one of particular importance, right? You could almost insert your own name there, right? That's Luke Harvey. Um, that's Anna Heitschu, that's Sarah Hamilton, that's Nadia Armour, whoever, right? You could put your own name in that. And it's just what would be considered another person um, on earth. However, in heaven, right? And it makes me think of this passage in Luke where Jesus says, "In the same way I tell you, there is rejoicing in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents." Right? So she was a person um, who maybe on earth was just another person, right? Like me and you. However, in heaven, there's this incredible celebration going on for her, right? Which I think is an accurate picture of what we can look forward to. And it talks about what she was like on earth, right? George MacDonald says she really loved, but not the sort of love that brought good to herself, but the sort of love that went outward. He says that like every man she met fell in love with her, but in a way that made them go back and love their wives more. That every child she met became her children in a sense, right? But in a way that made them love their parents more. And it would take a long time, I think, to get into the ins and outs of what kind of love that is. But I think it's really just a picture of love as something that is serving instead of something that is taking, right? And he talks about Christ's love and as like when you throw a rock in water and the ripples go outward, right? And that's sort of she represented that, and her ripples spread out and just gathered in all these people to herself. And so there's this huge procession going on, and then this ghost, but it looks like two ghosts. Should obviously remind us of Jekyll and Hyde. This ghost, this little guy carrying or holding a bigger person on a chain, comes up and begins to interact with her, and we find out that this little guy is the real person, right? And the tragedian, which is like an actor, the tragedian is sort of like a ghostly representation of his inmost desire. So it really is like the little person would be Jekyll, and the person on the chain would be Hyde. Um, and we find out that they were married, right? We find out that they were married, and the ghost, the tragedian on the chain, is the one who does the speaking for the most part. Okay, so there's this interaction, and the tragedian is super dramatic, right? He's an actor, and he says on page 122, he's like, "It's not myself I'm thinking about. It's you. The thought of you here alone, breaking your heart about me." And so there's this super dramatic scene where he's like, "The reason that I am so sad is not because of me. It's because I'm thinking about how sad you must be now that we are separated." Um, and her response is incredible, right? And I'm paraphrasing, but her response is like, "Oh, don't worry. I don't miss you, right? I'm more whole than ever." But it's not in a sense of like, "I don't miss you because I don't care about you." It's, "I don't miss you because I have everything." Right? I'm in the backcountry now. I have the full tree. I don't just have the leaf, right? I see the full picture. And so there's a deep love, right? There's a deep love for her former husband, but it's not a love that needs him anymore, right? It's a love that wants him to have the same joy that she has. And so the tragedian is like, "Oh, you don't miss me?" Right? And it throws him off because that was his whole purpose in being there. And so really he tries to invite pity, right? He tries to invite pity, and there's an interesting scene on page I think it's 122. No, excuse me, 124, where the ghost and or the tragedian and the little ghost who's holding him have this little conversation. And they're like, "Well, we could just go on with this. I mean, it's clear that she's okay." And they're like, "Wait a second. She needs to realize how much we've done for her that she didn't notice. We need to make sure that she pities us." And there's this deep desire for him to be pitied, right? Which I think, if we're honest, a lot of us maybe feel that, right? That we want people to see how difficult our lives are. We want people to understand how much we give and how little we receive. Um, and so he says, "No." Well, this is the tragedian speaking again, the person on the chain. "No, I cannot ever forgive what they have done to you. You must be miserable." Right? He's not picking up on the fact that no, she's not miserable. Right? She's completely whole and completely well. And that doesn't change her love for her former husband, but it's not a love that responds to pity because she doesn't need to, right? She's completely full. And so, really, when he says, "You must be miserable," and he's pretending like he cares about her, really, he only cares about himself. He wants to be pitied. And so, when he's saying, I'm scared and my heart is breaking for you, when she says, "Don't fear, I'm more whole than ever," he should say, "Awesome," right? But it's clear now that his pity or his love for his wife is actually desire for pity for himself. It reminds me of the character of Robert's wife, right, who wants her husband, but really she only wants him so that she has someone to control. Or Michael's mother, right, who wants Michael, but it's clear that she wants him for selfish purposes, and she wants him above wanting God. And so we get the same image here of someone who pretends to care, but really he's only caring for his wife so that he will be pitied himself. Right? So he's like, "No, I can never forgive what they have done to you. You must be miserable, separated from me." And she says this, she's still trying to get it across to him. "You only think I must have been if I loved you." She's like, "You must think I was miserable. The reason you want me to be miserable is because that will show that I loved you." And she says, "You just have to trust me that I did, but now I am in love." In love. Look around, right? This is the land of love personified, or excuse me, this is the land of love solidified. I am in love. I am in Christ's love. Do you not understand? Yes, now I love truly. She's like, don't, I know the reason you want pity is because that'll show that I care about you, right? Which, I mean, we've all done before, where you like, don't text your significant other for a while because you want them to see that you're angry, and you want them to see that you want them to pity you, right? Or, um, you do something so that they'll be like, "Oh, I see how much you care for me," right? And it's like a pity. But she's like, "Look, I have every love that I can imagine right now, right? True love is love that does not include the need to be loved in return." And that's something that's really been hitting with me, is that for the tragedian and for the person holding the string, his love for his wife was really the need to be loved in return. And even on earth, her love for her husband included partly a need to be loved in return. But true love, which is what she is in now, there is no need to be loved in return, which is why she says, "I don't need you anymore. I want you to stay and have the joy that I have, but I don't need you in that sense. Um, I have everything that I need here." And so, to pause before we get back to the character, the dwarf ghost, the one holding, begins to struggle. You can see that he understands, right? He's the real person, but he has to let go of that chain. He has to let go of his desire to be pitied, his desire to be felt sorry for. And on page 129, it says, "I do not know," this is C.S. Lewis speaking, "I do not know that I ever saw anything more terrible than the struggle of the dwarf ghost against joy." And you think, why would you struggle against joy? Well, to struggle against joy is because he needs to let go of the thing that he's been holding on to, his desire for pity, right? For him to enter into true love, he needs to give up his desire for pity. It's a great divorce, right? You can't keep the smallest bit of hell in heaven. He has to give up his desire for his wife to feel sorry for him. And he has to say, you know what? She doesn't need me anymore. And that's a beautiful thing, right? That's something that should cause him to rejoice and not something that causes him to desire more pity. But he still doesn't get it, right? The tragedian and the dwarf actually, I think, speaks at this point. He says, so you don't need us. He's like, it's finally kind of registering. He's like, you don't really need us here. And she says this, no, right? But he, the source of love, wants you. And then she says, everything bids you to stay. Give up your desire for pity, right? And a great quote here about what pity is for. Pity was meant to be the spur that drives joy to help misery, but it can be used the wrong way around. It can be used for a kind of blackmailing. So the purpose of pity is that if we look at something that is miserable, we should feel pity towards it and we should fix it, right? So it's a spur, pity, that feeling we have of pity for something should drive us to help misery, to help what it is that we are pitying. But she says it can be used the wrong way around. It can be used as a kind of blackmailing, right? Which is that thing of, not responding to someone in a text and just like, being a little pity party and wait until they'd be like, hey, are you okay? How's everything going? Are you sure? I'm sorry that I didn't give you more attention, whatnot. And that's a small example, but for the ghost and the tragedian, it's his love for his wife is sort of blackmailing, right? He wants her to feel sorry for how lonely he's been, and it's not true love for Sarah Smith. And so basically, he says, well, just like many of the other ghosts have said, other than the one with the lizard, he says, if I can't have your pity, I'm going back. And the more he says that, the tragedian begins to grow and he begins to shrink. And it's just like the theme from Jekyll and Hyde. Whatever you feed will grow. He's feeding his desire for pity rather than the choice to become solid and to stay in true love. And she says this, and it's kind of a sad but true last statement. And not sad in the sense, sad for the tragedian, not sad for us. She says, our light can swallow up your darkness, but your darkness cannot now infect our light. Right? She's sad and she's on her knees, right? Trying to get her husband to say, so it's not like she doesn't care. She deeply cares, but she doesn't need him in that sense, right? Because she doesn't need anything in return. She's in heaven, right? She's in God's arms. She's in the land where Jesus reigns. She doesn't need anything. And she says, our light can swallow up your darkness, right? The light over all shadows rides the sun. But your darkness can't infect our light, right? You can't bring the smallest bit of hell into heaven. And eventually, the little dwarf figure just disappears, right? It says he almost becomes like part of the chain himself. And is swallowed up with his desire to be pitied. So to end, I think it's important to come back to what we've been talking about a lot, which is that reflections should point to the reality, right? Leaves should point to trees. Pity should drive us to love, right? Lust should make us realize, should point us towards something like a perfected version of lust, right? We should not be content with the reality itself because the reality is so often flawed. It should be pointing at, rewind. We should not be content with the reflection itself because the reflection is typically perverted and flawed. And even if it's not perverted, it's not the full picture. But it should make us see glimpses of something bigger and better and wholer, which is the reality, right? And Leaf by Niggle, the leaf points to the backcountry. The reflection should point back to the light. But the lifeline can become a death line. And I don't know if you picked up on this, but they talked about at first the little ghost holding the tragedian, it was his lifeline, right? And they call it the lifeline at the beginning. At the end of the chapter, they say he couldn't let go of his death line. right? And the reason it says death line is because he's holding on to the reflection rather than embracing the reality. At first, it was the thing he had, right? We have reflections. Look around us. Everything is a reflection of something bigger. And that's a lifeline for us because it points to something bigger. But if we hold on to that lifeline, if we hold on to the reflection instead of accepting the reality and using it to point us to the reality, it becomes a death line. And so a good thing to think about is like, what are your lifelines? What are the things that you're holding on to that if you take them out of their proper order, if you desire them over a desire for Jesus, can become a death line. And that's where we're in for chapter 12.